This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, an international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Association for Coaching podcast, which now may be becoming an annual event and has slotted in nicely after the end of our celebratory AC at 20 series and before we embark on our team coaching series, which starts next week. My name is Maxine Bell, and I am the podcast manager for the Association for Coaching, but today I'm here as one of the hosts of 2022. I hosted the series on using creativity with coaching called Let's Make Coaching Creative, but very importantly, and I'm very proud to be joined today by three of my peers and fellow hosts. Now, we will be diving and looking more closely at the why and how we became a host and the experiences. But could you all first just give your name and a brief introduction to the series you hosted? Should we start with you, Claudia, as you are first host of 2022?
Hi, lovely to be here and to think about the series that we did a year ago. I joined the AC as part of technology and innovation to try and take as one of our goals we have that we want to communicate what's happening out there in the coaching community regarding technology and innovation. And one of the ways we wanted to do this was through the podcast. And so we had the lovely opportunity of interviewing founders that were building tech startups that help the coaching community. We also interviewed academics and people in the coaching community that were keen on technology and innovation to try and understand better what was happening at the time. This was right after COVID, and 80% of the sessions were already taking place virtual environment. COVID, of course, fast forwarded that even more. And so it was a very interesting experience to see how tech could complement the practice and help coaches in general in more than just having Zoom as a provider of the calls and be that medium in which we provide the coaching session, but also outside that, what could tech help with?
Thank you. George?
Thanks, Maxine. Hello, everyone. It is an honor to be back and strange to be a guest today, not in the host seat, but lovely to be here. So my name is George Warren. I also sit on the same AC UK team that Claudia does, and I'm very passionate about the way in which coaching is growing and maturing and evolving, and what that means for all stakeholders, all of society. So I have a keen passion, as regular listeners might know, in the intersection between climate change and coaching, but also more broadly social conscience. So the series that I hosted for the AC was called The Conscience of Coaching, which it turned out to be something of a catch-all word for topics with some fascinating folks all around the world around the neuroscience of coaching and behavior change. We had one of the world-leading experts on eco-anxiety, eco-distress, and the emotional aspects of climate change, and some very interesting post-capitalist conversations and what Buddhist economics looks like. So it was fascinating, and got really deep into the psychology of coaching, and also had some very interesting conversations about where coaching may be going, where coaching should be going.
Thanks, George. And Rob?
Hi, Maxine, Claudia and George. Nice to be with you and nice to be reflecting again. It seems not that long ago that we were just a year ago reflecting on the year before. And, you know, in many respects, it's just that how far we've come, really, and how far there is still to go in terms of what we're covering in the podcast. But I think for me, and I'm sure we'll get into this today, one of the fascinating things about this journey is what you learn about coaching along the way, not just from a sort of a technical point of view, but in terms of how coaching is impacting the world and the effect that it's having on the world and how that is changing and how it has changed as well as we've begun with the AC 20 series. So celebrating 20 years of the Association for Coaching, which is one of the series that I've hosted last year in 2022. The other series that I was invited to host last year was the Make Time for Marketing series, which was a really interesting and insightful experience for me, because I often share with folks that I think that marketing is my weakest strength, if you like. And it's an area I'm certainly not an expert in, although I'm lucky to be surrounded by experts. And it was a privilege to be able to interview some of those folks and some folks I hadn't heard of before that was suggested for the series to get a better understanding of what marketing means to those in the world of coaching and for coaches, many of whom are running their own business or running a small number of businesses themselves as coaches. And I think what that series taught me, amongst many things, is that actually a lot of coaches do struggle with that side of things, the actual putting themselves out there as coaches. As confident as they may be as coaches, they may struggle with understanding aspects of digital marketing and how to present themselves in an authentic way out there in the world digitally. It was really great for me to be able to ask questions on behalf of the people within the audience that this series was intended for, and hear some of the answers, because a lot of the answers that came back, as perhaps this is true for so many podcasts that we do, there were so many gems in those answers and things that never even crossed my mind in terms of how things like self-worth, procrastination and habits play such an important part of not just everything we do, but things like marketing. And really it comes down to sort of fundamentals. But there was a lot of great sort of strategic and tactical stuff in there as well. So for me, and having had the pleasure to produce and be part of both Claudia and George's series in the background with you, Maxine, I think for me, the marketing series was a more practical one. It's something that folks can listen to and apply. And I think it's nice to have that in the mix as well as all the other stuff which is relating to coaching. In a similar way to the series that we did before that, back in 2021, which was the Boost Your Coaching Business. It had a very similar feel for me, but from a different perspective. And coming out of that series and reflecting back on it today, I think both you and I off air, Maxine, have discussed actually how much gold there is in that series in terms of what you could. It's essentially, it's not structured like a course, but all the content's there. I think you could listen to that series alone and hear everything you need to know about, marketing yourself more effectively. So for that reason, I feel very proud to be invited to do that series, but also to offer that out to the world for free to anybody that's got reasonable internet access.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rob. I agree. That was a really juicy, practical series that if you listened to it, you would have had just so much information just ready at hand. It was like a little mini course. After listening to you all, what I was thinking was that, first of all, we've got a really good mix of hosts here today. So Claudia and I were the newbies on the scene in 2022. George, this was your second time round. And Rob is like the elder of podcasts, really, because you've done many for the AC, but you've done many for your own podcast series and other people. That's what you do as an audio producer. So it's really nice to have all these different experiences in the same room. But also, as well with the podcast, is the diversity of topics that we cover, that we can jump from a practical series like the marketing one into the conscience of coaching that George did, which went on a much deeper and broader and spiritual level, really. So, that's one of the things I really enjoy about working in the podcast team, is that we jump around from innovation and technology, into marketing and into some deeper topics, and then into the AC series, which covered all sorts of themes and topics in relation to coaching. And of course, I did the creativity and coaching series. And and mainly because I'm passionate about creativity and the power of creativity to create change. And it's something that I've started to wake up to in the last couple of years, because probably like many creatives, I'm one of those people that had it suppressed when I was very young, and then went through life not really embracing my creativity. And I've spent the last few years really connecting again to that real part of myself that's very creative. And then as a coach, starting to wonder that just the ordinary kind of coaching wasn't working for me, the kind of basic model that a lot of us start with. A lot of us have to develop and grow and find what works for us and is authentic for us. And creativity for me is a natural bent where I go. So I just felt really passionate about doing that topic. And it was really interesting to see actually how deep creativity took people, when we had all those wonderful guests on, and they were expressing the level of depth that using creativity with coaching, for instance, takes their clients, and also how fast sometimes you get results from using that. I was surprised to hear the results of what they were doing, and in a huge variety of ways, whether it was dance or poetry or art, or the use of cards even that Laurette talked about, which was fascinating. I didn't anticipate, a bit like you with the marketing series, even, what comes out of a topic that you choose for a passionate reason or because it's something you're interested in, but then can take you down into so many levels and bring up so many themes that were unexpected even. So yeah, it's a really incredible experience, I think, to host a series like that and to see what happens. And in fact, approaching the AC for that series was how I ended up getting this job, working as a podcast manager. Even that sort of step that happened, was unexpected. And to me, that's kind of evidence that if you follow the trail of your passion and desire, you just don't know where it will lead and where it will take you. So I don't know if any of you had any other reflections on that particular sort of theme.
While you were talking, the thought I had was of how certain podcasts can be creating awareness, causing reflection, creating knowledge, and how one of the things I always think about is how to keep learning and development going, even after you finish your studies. And as coaches, that's very relevant for us. And so how a podcast series, for some people, it's reading a book. For some people, it's reading a magazine. For others, it's listening to the learnings from the different podcasts and how different it can be depending on the series that is created. And so basically the potential that there is massive.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, and that's certainly what I've experienced, which I'll talk about a bit more later. But yeah, George and Rob, did you have any thoughts about following that trail of something that you feel passionate or interested in, and where it's taken you in regards to doing a podcast series, hosting a podcast series?
Well, I think that I totally agree with and I loved hearing your journey there, Maxine. And I really agree with your point, Claudia. I think podcasting is a hugely relevant way of staying connected, staying informed, but more broadly learning about the industry. And if we take a longer view of time, professional coaching is still a very, very young industry, 20 years or so, maybe more towards 30. But so it's constantly evolving, and it's evolving with technology as well, as we've seen most profoundly in the last couple of years. So I'm always going to be grateful to the AC for investing so proudly and heavily and broadly and trustingly in their podcast series and bringing in such a diversity of thought and experience and topics, because it seems a really appropriate way to talk about coaching, which is very open-minded. And I've learned so much from listening to these podcasts. And I totally resonate with your point, Rob, that marketing series could be marketed and sold to in another format. There is so much helpful, free, relevant content. And I really mean relevant because sometimes as soon as a book is published, it can take 1-2 years to write and published, and it's always a snapshot in time. But the fact that the turnaround for these conversations is so quick and they're so relevant that really some of the most cutting edge conversations in coaching are taking place in podcast format, and they've taken place in these series for the AC.
I think there's some lovely points there, just reflecting on what you're sharing. I really like that thought, Claudia, and I perhaps take for granted the wisdom and the knowledge that's being shared through these podcasts, which I have the privilege of listening to week in and week out. But when I pause to think about it for a moment, it's pretty immense already in terms of, the voices that have been shared and the knowledge that has been shared and the whole business of standing on the shoulders of giants, when you think about it in those sorts of terms. And I love what I think you were saying, what I thought I heard you say was, the podcasts can be a great way to, in an informal way, sort of maintain your sharpness and sort of your So ongoing learning and development. I love that thought and idea, and thinking of a podcast in that respect. I've always thought of podcasts as keeping the conversation going. But to think of it from a learning perspective is a really fascinating thought. And perhaps it makes more relevance that the podcast series is supported by and delivered by the digital learning team within the AC as well. So all of a sudden there's a very good fit there, which is perhaps no coincidence. And I think to George's point and to your point there, Maxine, in terms of the breadth, I think one of the things that's standing out for me, I think Claudia's technology series and George's series in terms of sort of conscious coaching and what you covered in terms of creativity is a very good example of that, Maxine, which I think we'll get into in terms of how that podcast has brought a number of people together and created its own micro community and movement off the back of it. I think the power of that is pretty incredible and not to be underestimated. But I think all of that reminds me of actually how fast things are moving in coaching in terms of its dimensions sort of more broadly, but also at a deeper level, in terms of the detail and the specialisms and everything else that's coming with all of that. So I think that there's definitely a sense, which I'm picking up on with the 20 years of the AC series, there's definitely a sense that coaching has come a long way. And to George's point, that it is still very young. But I also feel, and I think it's easy to begin to feel this as a listener to the podcast, if you follow each episode, I think you really would get a sense of movement, of forward motion and things picking up pace in so many different corners of coaching. It's not just coaching, it's the sort of the niches, if you want to use that word, or the sort of more specific specialisms. And it's just growing and growing, and it's pretty incredible. It does sort of blow your mind when you start to try and project and think about where things will be in the next 5 to 10 years, or even the next 20 years, as we reflect on 20 years this year.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think using the word the power, because coaching is evolving really rapidly, and I'm fairly new to coaching. Even I 2018. I'm not. And I've sort of done part-time coaching. It's not a full-time thing for me. So for me, joining as a host and then also through that becoming part of the AC, and that was something I wanted to say, was that even though a lot of our hosts actually work for the AC, that's not a requirement of becoming a host for our podcast series. I was a complete newbie, and on so many levels. And I think that I was just watching Claudia, listening to all of the podcasts that I have to listen to them in detail, like you, Rob, because I write the show notes, and listening to Claudia and George and yourself, and listening to all the different styles of hosting, the different voices, that how we all approach it in a slightly different way, and what bits of our personality we bring into those conversations. And that's something that for me is very important, to be that sort of, I know it's a bit of a cliche term these days, but your authentic self. And if you're coming with a topic that really interests you deeply, then that makes that easier. And so it brings more passion and it brings more power then. And that was my experience. I mean, I think I had to pull that series together quite quickly at the beginning of the year, because we had a delay in another series in our planning for the series over the course of the year. And I had one guest at that moment, didn't I, Rob? And I was already nervous and terrified, but I somehow just thought, well, I want to do this. I'll have faith. And I spoke to that one guest. It was Anna Shiva. And then she told me another name. And then there was this incredible domino effect. It also reflects to me kind of what's happening in coaching, that I just see all these seeds being planted and all these plants growing from, one, I think partly with what's happened in the last couple of years in the world. There's more of an urgency for change. I mean, I've always been keen on change, but I think now it's out there. We're in this perma-crisis situation, and we know that change is needed now, not in sort of, the future. And so, yeah, even the spiraling effect of how I created that podcast has reflected to me this fast moving, as you've said, thing that's going on in coaching, and these different topics that we're covering. Claudia, with the technology, we only mentioned yesterday, didn't we, Claudia, that we have to do another series on that soon, because that's just evolving so fast. But at the same time, there's this beautiful deep dive with George, which the topics that you covered, I just love listening to every one of them. And what's interesting for me is the links with some of the things that George was talking that then came out through the AC at 20 conversations, and cross-cultural coaching bit that came up as a theme through the AC21 was fascinating, about bringing in wisdoms from other cultures and how important that is to sort of break down that Western model that can be very rigid and slightly arrogant at times. So yeah, the depths and the broadness that it takes you to, and the impact and the power that we see happening is just, I'm just really amazed by it. And it gets me excited, and it gives me hope for the world. It gives me hope for the future to listen to our hosts and listen to our guests, following their passion. And I think George found that with his climate change series last year, didn't you? That you thought it might be kind of depressing and heavy, but actually it wasn't. There was joy found in unexpected places, hope found in unexpected places. And I think that's where coaching is wonderful, because the motivation for coaching is about change. And being able to bring that into a podcast situation, as you say, where it's free, it can be relevant, we can keep tackling the new themes that come up, to me is a gift. And it's been an honour to be part of this year, really has. I was just thinking, from saying that, I'm really interested to know what the impact has been personally for you guys on a professional and personal level, emotionally, mentally, in any other way. I'm really interested to dig a bit deeper into how that's affected you, what your experience has been like.
Well, I'm happy to answer first, Maxine. So the recording came at a time of which was quite challenging for me. I became a father for the first time and had COVID, and everything was a bit of a blur. And the recordings actually provided a lot of groundedness for me and a lot of focus, a bit of stability in a very swirling environment in my life. I would say that the two series have really helped me understand my definition of coaching and how I view the purpose of coaching and the ethics of coaching. And one of the things that I'm really interested in, which has been deepened by this recent series, is the fact that coaching as an industry, it doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? There are coaching psychologists. We're influenced by counseling. We're influenced by sports. We're influenced by business, and we're influenced by philosophy and by spirituality and by global events and by politics. So what I've really enjoyed is looking at the interconnectedness of all these subjects and exploring in what ways coaching can learn from the world of psychotherapy, and what ways coaching can learn from religion and spirituality. And so I purposely stretched quite broadly with the guests I wanted to speak to in this. And in terms of, well, the results for me were really just 6 really beautiful, interesting conversations. And I was really buoyed by all the support that I received from folks just reaching out. Someone even wrote a blog post on summarizing one of the interviews I had, because it was so interesting to them. They wanted to share it with their followers. So it really gave me a lot of wind in my sails that there's an appetite for explorations of the important but scary topics that maybe coaches don't feel comfortable bringing up with their clients, and the aspects of the self as a person that we squash or repress in our coaching because we feel we need to be a business or executive coach, and we don't talk about spirituality, or we can't talk about climate change. And I'm always interested in what's the cost of not bringing your whole self, and not contracting and exploring the things that you might want to speak about. So loads of positive support, and I've been encouraged after this to carry on the conversations in very interesting ways, and hosting these 2 series and the wonderful support from the AC and the wonderful team and the listeners has given me the courage to write more, to write a book, and to carry on the conversations. So it's been the most wonderful professional experience, first and second time around. And it's given me lots of energy, inspiring thoughts, and lots of confidence to take take this forward and help more people through conversations of this nature.
That's really wonderful to hear. That's so great to hear that you're writing a book. That's wonderful, and all these other things. Thank you, George. Claudia, what about you?
Well, similar to you, George, I was surprised by the impact it had, these conversations also on myself. This was after COVID. We were separated physically and also not as with each other in a daily basis. And so I was at the time working in a software, developing a software, and having these interesting conversations with people around me about technology. But there was also a lot of fear about technology, and it's going to substitute coaching and how technology, and there was a lot of this fear component. On my side, I was very excited about technology and taking it into my practice and using it with my clients, simple technology and more complex technology. But I'm talking about things like how to do values on my daily practice, and talking to fellow coaches who didn't necessarily want to do values exercises on a remote setting or constellations in a remote setting. And so this series was inspired by that fear and that sort of not appetite. I was then reflecting yesterday and thinking, why was this series born? And of course, the reason has evolved. Coaches nowadays don't feel in that same way, that fear or that thinking that technology will substitute coaching. And so, of course, it has changed. And as you say, Maxine, we have to do a follow-up. But then I was also thinking technology spills on everything. And so, for example, it's almost like the series themselves will include technology naturally in the conversation. So, for example, when we think about marketing, there are now technologies that can help you draft sales emails, or that can help you, with blogs, and how to AI can help to try and brainstorm what type of blog you can write, or titles for a blog. And so things like that wouldn't necessarily need already a series by itself. But when we're talking about marketing, technology would already come into it. So thinking about the future, how can we address technology in the future? It will probably be more organically within the series themselves. I'll be hosting this year the Approaches podcast, where we will be talking about the different approaches. And then, of course, it's how can technology impact the different, or how has technology impacted the different approaches separately? And so thinking about constellations, when we're talking about constellations, then how has technology impacted that approach? And so I think it will be brought in organically into the other series. The aspect that I found the most fascinating was the conversations and the people I got to know, and the kindness. As you said, Maxine, feeling proud of this industry, the kindness that there is in all these conversations and all these people I interviewed. It was a natural conversation, a friendly conversation, an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of ideas, and a very kind type of approach to the way they were sharing information that they knew with the rest of the community. And it was a lovely experience. It felt like I almost miss having those conversations with these people, and want to have a coffee chat with them, a round table, once a month, to just talk about what's happening in technology, because it's so interesting to hear and to discuss it in a conversation. And so I think that what I enjoyed the most were the interactions and the conversations that could be had with these people.
That's really lovely, Claudia. Yeah, I think I've had the same experience, and I do want to go and have a coffee with some of the people that I spoke to, and I am still in contact with some of them. So it's the connections that have been built have been really beautiful, and I agree about the kindness. I think that's definitely a part something that I've felt, but also I think for me as well was joy. I particularly remember interviewing Pearl Jordan, who is a very joyful person, and she's a dancer. when we were recording on the video, she's moving her body a lot, and she just makes you smile. And so I felt privileged, and each person with their personality, everyone was generous and passionate about what they were sharing, and it's extremely touching and moving. But also creating that connection is such an important thing right now, getting into our humanity in that way. And the fact that everyone was a coach, but was very much themselves. So yeah, so it's a really lovely thing. It's almost like you're sort of developing friendships as well as professional relationships. I just had a thought, Rob, before we go on to you, from your perspective as well, as somebody who is an experienced podcaster and audio producer, what's it like also for you personally to watch us budding hosts enter the arena? Is there an impact on you from that experience as well?
The truth is, it's a tremendously rewarding experience being able to support people to evolve themselves and at the same time evolve others. I mean, if you think about that for a moment, there's a kind of a magic knock-on effect, a ripple effect that's going on there for any new host. And actually, I will say this, putting my hand up as an experienced host, that the journey never ends. I'm constantly learning. I feel as a participant on this conversation today, just as I did probably in the early days, probably managing my nerves a little bit better, but I'm still feeling that, if you sort of mean. I'm containing that. But I think that reminds me that we're all on a journey. And I often talk about podcasts not being about the podcast. And actually, as a host, a podcast is a tremendously powerful self-growth tool, because the things that the hoops that you have to jump through, the things that you have to do, most of the time are sort of unconscious to you, unknowingly. There are aspects of yourself that you have to evolve and develop in order to be able to deliver a podcast. And, that might sound like I'm sort of stacking it up for anyone interested in doing that as a scary thing to do. But it's no different to anything else, like starting a business or, becoming a father. It's just new territory, and there's an opportunity to face self and challenge ourselves in a positive but fun and interesting way too, that we get to learn about ourselves. And I'm sure George and Claudia would probably agree with this. You learn a lot about yourself through the process, as much through the conversations as you just going through the process, I suppose. So yeah, it's a real privilege, and it's incredibly rewarding, because as a coach, first and foremost, before I even got into podcasting, I care deeply about human evolution and self-development. And the fact that I am lucky to be part of podcasts and podcasting as a vehicle to achieve that means that I get to see on a daily basis people face themselves, face their fears, overcome challenges, face challenges, and a tremendous amount of creativity. And I think that's the thing that really gets me excited. Is no two podcast conversations are the same for me. You might think sort of structurally and mechanically it's a sort of rinse and repeat process, but it's not. Every conversation has its own nuance, its own feel. The content's wildly different from conversation to conversation, and that keeps me very interested, and I hope keeps listeners interested, because I feel if I'm interested and I'm hearing this stuff over and over again, the listener's going to enjoy it too. So I think there's a lot in there, Maxine, that we could probably explore another time and go a lot deeper on. What I can absolutely say is that, and again, I'm sure this is true for you, Maxine, as well as you, George and Claudia, you're not the same person at the end of the series that you were going into a series. That's not to be underestimated as well, not just with what you learn, but how you evolve too.
I definitely experienced that. I was not the same person by the end of it. I did things I didn't know I could do. So yeah, thank you for saying that, Rob. Gosh, there's so many thoughts going through my mind, because Rob knows me well and knows that I like to have quite deep conversations. There's lots of places I would like to dive into. But again, I might have to hold back a little bit. In a way, what you just said, Rob, connects in with the idea that the part of this journey is almost, the term I use is soul connection. It's soul connection with myself, and it's a soul connection with others in the process. Very good. And just to make it real as an experience for people that might be thinking of becoming a host, what are the challenges that you've faced? Has there been any challenges in this process that you have faced? Maybe George, let's start with you.
Well, many, Maxine. The first two words that came to my mind were a phrase I really don't like and I take issue with. And I hear it a lot among coaches. I hear it a lot among clients. Imposter syndrome. And it's not a phrase I like, but it does speak to that feeling of nervousness I get and vulnerability of, okay, I'm going to be speaking to all these amazing experts about this. And who am I to be talking about this subject? And that takes a bit of getting over. And I think in order to host a podcast series, I think it's really valuable to notice that, maybe challenge it, and also to connect with your passion and your energy and your values and your dreams, because that passion and energy, and in my case, curiosity, has been, I think I used the phrase wind in my sails, but has really been the fuel in my engine, keeping me going and pushing me into these really uncomfortable places. I got a bit of stars in my eyes ever since I became a coach. Richard Boyatzis was one of my coaching heroes. My wife and I watched a webinar of his. We projected it onto our living room, and we always talked about Boyatzis and how influential he was. And he's been coaching since the 60s. I think he's an incredible CV and library of books he's written. And I just got a bit dazzled. I got a bit like starstruck. If it was in person, I may have asked him for an autograph. So to get him was something like as a guest, and those other 5 guests this series was just wonderful. It was really a privilege, really, to speak to them. And so, what I'm touching on is a sense of insecurity at the start, but then the payoff of sort of pushing through that is, wow, I've had these really cool conversations and I've learned a lot. And the bonus is I've provided some interesting content for people to listen to and hopefully learn about these people's work and learn about these concepts and learn about a different way of thinking or feeling about a particular subject. So a little bit of insecurity at the start. And as with most things in life, the payoff for diving in and noticing the fear and going with it has been immense, major, and abundant. And I have, I've really, really enjoyed every moment of it.
That's fantastic, Claudia.
I completely resonate there with the anxiety at the start, and of course it makes sense because it's a new thing, and so when you're changing, there's always that anxiety of doing something new. Of course, rephrasing it, as you mentioned at the end, of rather than making it about you and how you are nervous, this exciting opportunity of bringing this information out out there for the other coaches to use shifts that anxiety into excitement in some way. Of course, this is done with the support of Rob and Maxine, who become our coaches in the process and helping the series to go smoothly and giving advice and suggesting different approaches. And so I'll never forget Rob telling me, talk slowly, even if you think it is slow, you can't hear it as slow. And of course, as I started in this same episode, I went, my full enthusiastic self and honing that down and being able to talk as I'm talking now, which probably is still too fast, but for me, that's slow. That's something that I owe to the coaching of Rob on one of my first episodes. So, of course, this is not done without support in the sense of you have, I would say almost there's growth in itself because you have a coach helping you through the process. And so learning about yourself, and it makes it fun as well in the experience as such, and the relationships you gain from it and the learning you gain from it. I guess that's the benefit of having different hosts because everybody has a different passion. If I had to do, if you decide to embark on the journey of a podcast, you'll have to, of course, be thinking about this topic for quite a bit. And so if you're not passionate about it, then it's very difficult to work on it for a longer period of time. And so that's the nice thing of having different hosts, that person can read about it, learn about it more, identify who are good speakers for the series, and really get impregnated or sponged or absorbed in this topic, and be able to then bring a series to life. And so I guess, Maxine, in your think about others who are thinking of embarking this journey of podcasting, I guess it's a fascinating experience. And if you do it with AC, then you have the support of the AC in the process.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I can relate to the talking too fast, nervous thing. So yeah, that's one of my things that I do a lot. So I may have done it in this one even, because even though I've hosted, I'm still nervous doing this conversation, even though I know you all. So it's good to acknowledge that. And thank you for both of you for sharing your vulnerability and honesty in that answer. Rob, have you got any reflections on what they were saying?
I think there are all sorts of challenges that do come up with creating anything, really. I mean, whether it's writing a book or creating a podcast, there are going to be unexpected challenges, and maybe there are going to be some challenges which are a little bit more predictable, and you're going to be dealing with those, and you can to somewhat plan for those. I think to Claudia's point, I like what you said about having a passion for it. The reflection that's given towards passion behind the podcast element of what we do here is perhaps not proportional to the actual passion that's involved between all of us. And I think about the dedication and commitment that you give, Maxine, that Miranda provides behind the scenes with the marketing, and Miranda with the direction. There's a tremendous amount of love and energy that goes into putting all of this together. And I feel that is shared by the hosts as well. All of us here and others that aren't here that have been part of the previous series of the podcasts that we've been producing and putting out there. And I think even within our own sort of hosting network, if you like, we've got a nice tight-knit community there where we occasionally come together like today, having a chat about it, but we're sort of connected across time and space anyway. So I think all of that is to say that I think there's a tremendous relationship between podcasts and community for me. And podcasts are a great way, obviously, to sort of stay in touch with a broader community, the global community, from a content point of view. But I think there's also a lot happening behind the scenes amongst the hosts, and for George and for Claudia and for you, Maxine, I know, and for myself too. Those series that we've hosted, we've got to know these people, we've got to spend time with them, we've got to speak with them and ask them about, this tremendous life and professional experience that they've had. So we've got to know them in that way and share, as George was saying earlier. We get the privilege of not just having that conversation privately, but openly in a way that it can be shared with anybody who's interested in the world through technology. So I think there's a lot more to this as we begin to explore it. That's what's coming up for me today, just having this conversation, Maxine, and sort of reflecting on what was just being said there. I think there's so much more to it that even I don't appreciate on a daily basis, that I'm learning right now, just having this conversation. I think there's a lot to be said for the passion that's involved in the communities, the micro communities, the multiple communities that are being evolved and developed because of this endeavour. It's hard to imagine before you embark on something like this that will happen. But now when we look back at it, particularly just over 2022, you look back at the people that have been involved and the connections that have been made between people, you think, well, how could that have possibly happened without the podcast? So I think that's what's come up for me there, Maxine.
Yeah, I think that's true. Also, I was thinking about love, actually. I mean, I loved all my guests. I found each one of them gave me something in different ways, as well as being impressed by what they were doing and how they were doing it. Anna, who is an executive coach, and often creativity is not, people often think that you can't take creativity into an executive space, and she's really put so much hard work and passion into, proving that's the very opposite, actually, and that taking it into executive space is a powerful thing to do. And, and she's now created a diploma in art-based coaching accredited by the AC. And then for me, just watching how they all connected with each other, and some of them have become friends, some of them are doing projects together. Beth seems to have just flown since we interviewed her. I mean, she's an incredible sort of person on lots of different levels, but she really takes action, and she's, watching her LinkedIn post come up and seeing what she's doing I'm just like, wow. And as you know, Rob, we're looking at creating a bigger event to do with creative coaching that's coming out of us all getting together to keep pursuing that passion and keep giving coaches the opportunity to learn and grow themselves and to find their thing or mix of things, whatever it is. And I think, to your point, Claudia, as well, that that fear that we all have when we enter this, and this imposter syndrome, which I agree, George, is a funny term, but we all get it a bit, gets overcome when you think about the passion for the topic and the service that you're hoping to give in talking about it. And I think that's where the fear just then doesn't become irrelevant, but it's just not as important, because you're here for a purpose, you've come with a purpose, and it overcomes that fear. And we want, you've both come back for a second series. Claudia's in the process of starting recording for the coaching tool series that she's creating, and George has had his second series. So you obviously enjoyed the first time round and you've come back for more. So all of those challenges haven't stopped you doing it again, because the positivity has sort of outdone any challenges that we faced. And as we all know, because we're coaches, we encourage people to stretch their comfort zones. So we're practicing what we preach, actually, by even doing this. And we're always looking for new voices. If you've got a passion for a topic and you're out there and you're sitting there with just some kind of version of limiting beliefs or imposter syndrome or fear and thinking, I can't do it, or I haven't been coaching very long, or we're not looking, are we, Rob, for people that have got loads of experience? I had none. I had no experience with podcasts, and I'm a podcast manager. How did that happen? I just had some skills that were appropriate for it, so you just don't know what's going to come out of taking that step, that leap of faith, or that, feel the fear and do it anyway moment, because it is about service. Ultimately, coaching is about service, about serving individuals and society and the broader world. So don't hold back on your passion. Always have a conversation with us, and I do think we do give good support. And I think being a host, this is one of the biggest things for me, has made me a better podcast manager. Going through that process and feeling the fear that our hosts have has given me more compassion and understanding. And I hope also, understanding the background process has made it better for hosts now. And we're always constantly reflecting and improving anyway, aren't we, as a team, Rob? It's just wonderful to hear the magic that happens for all of us on so many levels, on a spiritual level, which is the deepest level, we go into. So yeah, it's just been wonderful to hear you all. I just wondered if you had any sort of final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners before you go.
I guess a thought I had while you were talking now was, even if the person is not feeling, or even if you're not feeling inclined to do a podcast series yourself, hearing what the AC community wants in the podcast series as the future topics or what to go deeper in. We, of course, have our passions, and it doesn't come unfounded, as in usually they are tied to something that is happening out there, or that we're hearing out there, or that we're getting from the community. But it would be interesting to get even more input into what they would want. So the marketing series, of course, we know that when you get out there as a coach and are starting, that it's difficult to get started and build your own business. So, of course, then the marketing series was born. But if there is something specific that you would want to be covered in a podcast series, what would it be? That would be lovely to hear as well from the community.
No, thank you, Claudia. That's a really good point. Yes, because we're looking at mental health at the moment, Rob, aren't we? So we're interested actually in what our members or other coaches would need, what topic they would like to be covered, for instance. So yes, so that's really helpful. Thank you, Claudia.
I agree with your words there, Claudia, and I'm noticing an offer within me to challenge our listeners as well. The AC have done amazing work in producing and curating some beautiful, inspiring, helpful, relevant content. And I just wanted to offer a challenge to our listeners to not simply passively consume the content and not do anything about it. But, we're recording at the start of 2023. And I really invite you to think about where your edge is in your coaching practice, in your coaching model, and to to stretch into some uncomfortable places that might be interesting to you in your coaching work, and maybe challenge the idea that, oh, I could never do that in my coaching, or I could never do that. To really leverage all the stories you've heard today and the content that's out there in these amazing series. Challenge yourself and stretch a bit and grow into some initially uncomfortable places, but that might be a very fertile, inspiring, profound area for you and your clients and all their stakeholders.
It's a lovely thought, George. I appreciate that invitation. I think there's a lot to be said about that in terms of, as coaches or people that are interested in coaching, what's the next stretch for us? And how do you want to connect with people? What feels like the right format? It may or may not be a podcast. And I think your invitation extends much more broadly than just being a host or even being a guest on a podcast. And actually, I think that for me, it's a nice invitation, because it's all well and good listening to the podcasts. I need to challenge myself on this too, by the way. It's all well and good hearing this wisdom, but what am I actually going to do now I've learned that thing? What am I going to change in my life or business or coaching based on what I've just learned from any episode that I have the pleasure of listening to? So I think that's a really great invitation there, George. So for anyone listening to this, what is it that you're going to do differently from today? And coming back to the podcast, I think, and the self-growth stuff, you're absolutely right. I mean, we are gentle. Bear in mind, there's a lot of support within the AC, and I'm biased here, but I'll say it anyway. I think a podcast is a great way of developing your voice and getting to learn more about a subject. In fact, the marketing series, for me, part of the reason I sort of jumped at it is because I don't really know much about it. And I thought this is going to be a great opportunity. It gives me a structure and a stretch to learn about something I feel I could learn more about. And with that in mind, there are a number of benefits to being both a guest and a host on a podcast. And one of those is definitely developing your voice. But another one is actually growing your expertise. Another may be developing your own credibility as a coach. And I think that's something that we all feel. We feel that a little bit more, to George's earlier point about imposter syndrome. I think there's a sort of confidence that comes with, I feel more confident about marketing now because I know I've got some stuff I can go back to if I can't answer the question, at the very least. So I think there's a lot to be said for the journey that we're on here. And looking forward to your point there, Maxine, there are a lot of really wonderful, interesting aspects of coaching that we've not even touched upon yet. And it's amazing to think that we haven't even touched upon some of these areas, such as mental health, such as career coaching, leadership, team coaching, which is coming up. So some of these areas, just to inspire the listener with some of the ideas that we've got bubbling up at the moment. But there's probably areas we don't even know about, and we need people to step up and reach out and let us know about those areas that are evolving or emerging in coaching. And let's make sure we're having a conversation about it, because if not already now, there's going to become a point in the future with these podcasts where they are going to have a significant impact in the world of coaching themselves. The conversations that we having are actually affecting the very subjects that we're talking about as well. So that's a very sort of motivating thought for me.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rob. I mean, there's so much else we could have talked about today in regards to this topic, whether it's the impact of podcasting and the coaching world and on ourselves personally. So yeah, it's been hard to restrain really, and to sort of, squeeze it into sort of an hour, but that often happens with our conversations. So it's not unusual, but thank you for everything you've shared. It's been really wonderful hearing of your experiences and just being part of it. I mean, the people I work with in the podcast team are just the loveliest people. I felt like I've landed on my feet working with people like you, Rob. And, I'm grateful for all of the learning and the teaching and the coaching that you've given me over the course of the last year. And, for Miranda taking a leap of faith with me, for letting me do this job even, and knowing that I did very different work before this. So yeah, it's been fascinating. And I just wanted to say we will put in the show notes where to contact you all I shall give mine at the end because I'm the person to approach about podcasts. But would you like to say briefly where's the best way to contact you, Claudia, George and Rob?
The best way to contact me, I would say, is LinkedIn. I'm always there. And also you can contact me on my email, which we can put in the episode notes.
Yeah, you can reach me at rob@associationforcoaching.com or LinkedIn.
Well, same as above, really. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, and that's a good central hub for a lot of the resources that I share and talk about. And yeah, say hello. It's great to hear from everyone, all the listeners, and any questions that pop up. So I will speak for all of us when I say if there's anything that's piqued your interest and you want to hear more of, reach out to us. We are all very friendly, kind people that love talking about this stuff. So yeah, LinkedIn, email, find me somewhere.
Thanks, George. Yeah, and I really appreciated the challenge you gave to the listeners as well earlier, so that was great. And you can contact me on Maxine B at associationforcoaching.com. I am on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, either of those ways, and we'll put some links to our contact details and anything else like our websites or anything else in the show notes. It's been an absolutely wonderful conversation with you. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you, Maxine. And yeah, I just want to express my gratitude to having a conversation with you, George and Claudia, today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I have been Maxine Bell. For 20 years, the AC's purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the Association for Coaching and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our website at associationforcoaching.com. You can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.